So this is just an overview of how I've organized the presentation. And something...
Is the microphone on?
Oh, I don't know. Should I just go the options? Okay. I guess I just have a very quiet voice. I can hold it maybe if that's easier. Like this? Is that better?
It's not on. Project.
Okay, awesome. I'll just try to speak really loud. So in this research, I define fodder to be all plants eaten by domesticated animals. So not just forage, but I'm using both forage and bought fodder. So I'll get into the whole structure of that later. So fodder is a lens. As many of you may know, the fodder and knowledge of fodder is really essential in the continuation of rural, agricultural, and pastoral livelihoods. So the Amazigh communities that I was working with in the High Atlas Mountains, for them, they rely on a combination of both purchased fodder, or cultivated fodder, bought fodder, and wild sources. So they pull from all different environments. Okay, hopefully this is better. Yes. I'm sorry, I do have a very quiet voice. Right, so this research and past projects by the Global Diversity Foundation found that animal agriculture is, for the past 50 years, has been one of the most stable aspects of rural livelihoods in these very small villages. So this research specifically compared fodder accessibility and diversity in two rural communes, Ait M'hamed and Imegdale, and it provides an insight into the adaptive strategies that these communities are using to maintain animal agriculture, traditional foodways, and wild plant interactions in response to socio-ecological changes that are occurring in the region. So my two field sites were in the High Atlas, as I said before. So the High Atlas Mountains are a region of really high biodiversity and plant endemism. About 65% of Moroccan endemic flora reside in the range. And the indigenous people there, the Amazigh, are very dependent on this biodiversity. They're very much subsistence-based, so they're extremely vulnerable to changes in the ecology. Imegdale was my first site, and it's a lot smaller than Ait M'hamed. I was only in the Douar land, and Douar is just a village. In Ait M'hamed, I stayed in the center, which is basically 4 villages joined into one. And I also got to visit a few other areas. And also each village, they had different languages and dialects, so I did work with translators for both sites. Imegdale, this is the village. They do terrace the valley because there's a river going through, so they have all their agriculture in the central valley. And then all the surrounding land is for grazing. It's just communal, so they can use it at will. And Ait M'hamed is much more economically developed because it's not quite as isolated as land, so they tend to have more diverse economic activities. They're not only subsistence-based, and they have more restricted communal land use, so more of the land's been privatized, and they also have some areas that are shared with other communes, and those have time use restrictions to conserve the flora. Mostly it's just for grazing though. So the main things I was focusing on were climate change, ecological degradation, specifically the intense drought periods that they're experiencing, really extensive deforestation, and really intense hydrological events, so extreme precipitation when they aren't having drought. And they're also bringing in more fruit of horticulture, a lot of apples, almonds, plums, pears, walnuts, that sort of thing. And they're also having more translocational households. A lot of people are migrating to urban areas. So like I said before, I did work with translators in both of the villages, and I used a combination of ethnobotanical and ecological methods to collect data. So which plants were fodder? In all, 31 fodder types were free listed, and the main thing to know is that basically all plants in the landscape are considered fodder or could be used as fodder. The only plants that were not were those that were eaten by camels, by other tribes that might share the spaces that they share, but these communities didn't have any camels. They just focused on cows, goats, sheep, mules, and chickens, rabbits. So we kind of just focused on non-traditional livestock. And also there were some plants that had laws and restriction against use as fodder because they wanted to protect them for market use and just help the communities to have these crops to sell instead. And another thing is that with wild plants, most of the plants didn't really have names unless they had some other significant human use. So if they were used as food, medicine, or fuel, they might have a name, or if they were cultivated, they'd have a name, but generally everything was just referred to as Touga, hence the title of my presentation. So in all, I was able to identify 100, or classify technically 112 species. However, there are a lot more. I was only there for 2 months, so time was a limiting factor. And the main thing I found was plant diversity and abundance was highest in the wild areas in Ait M'hamed, and much more abundant in the fields in Amslan. So Ait M'hamed is better for grazing. Amslan is more oriented towards cows and animals that we just grow food for. Okay, so the folk categories that emerged were wild fodder plants, cultivated crops, mostly barley and alfalfa, field fodder, which included leafy fodder from other crops, food crops, as well as planted grasses, fodder-specific grasses, purchased fodder, and then green oak or toseft. Green oak is it's technically a wild plant, but because it's such an important source, especially in Amslan, they consider it sort of a different life form and in its own group of fodder. And also, people would use food scraps, mix their kitchen scraps every day with whatever they were feeding their animals. So here is a more detailed, I don't really have time to get into it, but a more detailed chart of, or classification chart of all the food. And of course, there's some crossover between different categories, and I've organized it by sourcing location, but it's just an extension of the one before. So these graphs display the importance results or importance rankings from the ranking exercise I did during household surveys. And the vertical axis represents the importance ranking from 0 to 5, and the horizontal is all the time periods, so 4 time periods between 1950 and 2018. So the main things to take away from this is just that bought fodder and cultivated fodder are becoming more important in the recent time periods. Wild fodder is going way down in importance. Overall, there's just a convergence of all of these different sources becoming of closer importance. And one thing that I found quite interesting specifically is if you look at the blue lines, that's the toseft tree. So even though it's lower in Ait M'hamed, both places toseft has been, or the green oak has been one of the most stable fodder sources in terms of its importance rank over time, despite really heavy deforestation and severe consequences for the trees in the forest because of drought in recent years. So the main thing I found was that fodder collection and use are really the most frequent and important daily cultural practices that were going on, or daily human-plant interactions, even more so than food, which was somewhat surprising. And the cultivation, sourcing, and conservation of the diversity of all these fodder plants in these communities are really foundational biocultural practices, creating direct connections between the humans and the landscape. And also using a combination of both the wild fodder, the cultivated fodder, and bought fodder makes it more accessible for those at lower socioeconomic status and those who are landless to have animal agriculture as part of their livelihoods and continue subsistence through their animals, even if they don't have access to land. And it also encourages these communal sharing networks. A lot of families would exchange labor, so people would go out and collect fodder for a family even if it wasn't on their land, and then they would be able to share that fodder for their animals. And of course, land conservation is a big part of fodder use as well. Just the timing of when all these pastoral areas are open in the spring and summer is very carefully calculated for when seed drops, and also for when plants will be most abundant, but not to a point where they'll be over-harvested. So it is a long history of just understanding the timing of when plants are opening up in the landscape. So the other important point is that women are really the key pivotal actors in all of these fodder interactions. Men do often take part in shepherding, but often women will also do that. They'll trade off the tasks. And it's a very patriarchal society, so women do a lot of backbreaking work, and it's sometimes even dangerous, some of the places that they'll have to go, because the trees have receded so much, and the wild fodder plants, they have to go to quite hazardous areas to collect often, if they're not collecting in their fields. And it's also, there are some conflicts, very violent conflicts that happened in the past over the communal and shared pasture lands. So cultivated crops are often very much multifunctional, so they provide both food for humans and for animals. And a lot of farmers are now taking to very different intercropping methods than they have used traditionally. So the picture on the right is of a field where they have apple trees. Apples are a very recent crop that they've been adding in the past decade. And underneath they've planted a fodder crop, which is alfalfa. And that also is nitrogen fixing, so aiding the soil. And they'll intersperse irises, so they'll sell the bulbs at market for food, but then they'll use the whole iris plant to dry it and then feed it to their animals, usually in the wintertime. And also all of the weeds, or what some people would call weeds, are just left to grow in any of their crops. So those are they never use herbicide or spray or anything like that, just so that they can have this extra food to give their animals. And they don't need it because the animals are basically their herbicide. So it's a very low input system. So this diagram shows how animals transform elements of local ecology and food into textile, labor, and facilitate nutrient cycling in the agro-pastoral system. So it's quite complicated, but don't really have time to explain all of it. And basically, I'm just trying to show that animals really help aid in soil integrity, and they reduce the cost input for households in terms of synthetic fertilizer and pesticides. So it's very helpful for them to maintain subsistence, but also have something that they can bring to market as well if they want to engage economically. It gives them options. So there are 4 main adaptive strategies to the ecological, climatic, and development changes that are going on in the region. Sorry, again, it's a rather complicated chart with the things I talked about at the beginning at the top, but the main adaptations that are happening is 1, reducing animal numbers, focusing on culturally important animals, and also landscape appropriate animals in each community. So in Amslan, the more mountainous isolated village, they focused on cows, and then in Ait M'hamed, they focused more on sheep and goats, and also all households tended to have chickens. That was pretty much a staple for everybody. And then there was also increased reliance on bought fodder, and more cellular importance and the use of all fodder types, as you saw in the diagrams earlier. And then increasing reliance on field and farm fodder and intercropping with legumes and other fodder plants becoming more regular fodder and soil fertility biocultural practice. And then 4 would be using smaller local communal grazing areas to reduce pressure on all of these wild grazing areas, the larger ones. So these strategies have allowed animal agriculture to remain a really important staple in traditional livelihoods. So for Amazigh communities today, persistence is really resistance, and that's resistance against cultural erasure and landscape erasure. So maintaining their cultural heritage, autonomy, and foodways, and preserving the agro-pastoral landscape that their livelihoods are really tied to is challenged by development and climatic change, as I explained before. And this research found that poverty alleviation strategies and development projects, so bringing in all of these apples and other plants or other crops for farmers, that has really helped local livelihoods and is really making a difference. However, it's really important to take into account fodder because their livelihoods are so tied to animals and they have such a strong importance in these communities that future projects could really be improved if they're looking at that and trying to preserve biocultural diversity in a more holistic way. So, that's all. Thanks for listening. I also have I put up all my field journals and pictures and some video clips on a blog if you're interested in seeing them. It's quite a beautiful place.